I'm here with Tom and Vikram to talk about Silent Sky's new album coming out February 4th, Nectar, on Napalm Records. How are you guys doing?
Busy days, stressed out of my mind.
I was gonna say, it's a
Because
loaded
of the
question,
record,
but we're getting
because
through.
of the holiday season?
Holiday season, finishing albums, videos, photo shoots, interviews, and all that good stuff.
And video game music.
And video games, deadlines too, yeah.
Wow, quite the busy schedule. So considering all of that busy schedule, how do you guys find time to collaborate on this new record, Nectar?
Well, we had time, first and foremost, because of this pandemic bullshit. So I'd say that's what sort of set this up. We felt that we had time that we never would have if it wasn't for this. So we figured we'd be smart for once and use the time given.
It's been all about time management this year. I mean, it's almost like choreographing a dance. Like you do an album for a month or two, and then you pivot to the next album. And then in Tom's case, he did Silent Skies, and then Redemption, and then Evergrey in the span of, 6 months?
And before that, Silent Skies and Evergrey.
And before
too,
that,
so
Silent Skies Satellites, and Evergrey Escape of the Phoenix.
So it's 14 months, 5 albums. But this is what we do. We love to do it. It sounds like we're whining. We're not. Definitely not. We love this.
For sure.
How was the creative process behind this record? And when you look at how Satellites end up being made, what were the main differences creatively between these two records?
The process was completely different, I think, because Satellites, Tom reached out to me and we started trading ideas via email. And so the entire album was made via email, basically. I don't know if we ever did a video call about it. We may have done like one phone call. We
was like really... Zoom didn't exist at those times. It feels like it's like 10 years ago. It's like,
I know,
but it is quite long ago actually. I mean, for Satellites was made like it was finished 3 years ago.
2017.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, exactly. And so we just traded MP3s, and so it was kind of a weirdly distant process to make the music where you're sending files back and forth and hoping the other person likes it. And there's a little bit of a communication disconnect just inherent in that process. However, when we did Nectar, we worked every day on Zoom. I think I saw him every morning for 3 months, this guy. And, we'd sit down together on Zoom and we'd wire in our studios so that, he can hear what's happening in my DAW and I can hear what's happening in his DAW in real time. And so we'd work on song ideas together. If we had ideas to try, we'd just try them, whether it's beats or song sections or melodies or whatever, or chord progressions. We'd try it, we'd refine it all in real time. So Nectar was far more collaborative than the first album.
Pretty much like sitting in the same room. At least that's what we thought. That's what we thought until we did that last week. And then we see the major difference in between being in the same room, actually be able to touch each other, and instead of this 1 second gap in time in between everything all the time. What were you saying? Come again? Yeah, all this bullshit. So yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed sort of the learning process of learning to write like that via Zoom, and it's also a lovely way for you to sort of I can mute Vikram when I don't want to hear him anymore and dive into my own stuff, and he can do vice versa. I guess he does that more often than me. But
you need your own space.
Yeah.
When you not necessarily to come up with ideas, but to refine them. Sometimes it's way easier to get the timing just right on a beat or play a part on the piano just right, when you're just by yourself in your space. So Zoom kind of gives you the best of both worlds, where you can be connected and also distant when you need to be. So
yeah, because otherwise in the same room you need to sit and wait for that guy to come up with his stuff. I could at the same time sit and do vocal melodies without interfering with his melody making, and also, when I go up and start working at 8 in my time, that gives us sort of 18-20 hours per day working time if we need it, instead of the regular 12.
Yeah, I was gonna say the time difference actually helps us big time in that way, because we get an extra, we get the 5 hours together in the middle of the day, and then we get 4 or 5 hours before that when it's one of us, and 4 or 5 hours after that when it's the other of us. So we we have a really efficient way worked out actually of doing this.
So outside of the creative process changes, musically, what do you feel is the biggest growth from one record into the next?
I mean, if this would have been going from the third to the fourth album, the difference wouldn't have been, I guess the difference wouldn't have been as big as it is for us. For us, it's a huge difference in terms of, because the Satellites album was finished, as we said, 3 years ago, or what is it, 2007, 4 years ago.
4
But
years.
so for us, we have matured 4 years, but for the audience, we just came out with it last year. So but yeah, we this time in between albums have given us the time to grow as a band, even though we didn't do anything except write more music, but it still sort of made us focus on who we thought we wanted to become, so
We
yeah.
have a very strong core now of the elements that define Silent Skies. I mean, it's always been piano and vocals, and it's still piano and vocals, but we have an idea of how we like to write songs, which I think is more potent than the way it was before. Direct, but not in like a bad, obvious way. Direct in a strong way. Like, the melodies are stronger, the music's more memorable, and then we color the soundscapes a little bit differently on this album. There's a little bit more synthesizer electronic work going on and some more beats as well. But I mean, basically we took that core of piano vocals, which is always there and probably always will be there, and then we just grew from that in a slightly different way.
What does Silent Skies offer both of you as musicians that it was lacking in your repertoire?
So much, it's hard to put into words. I mean, it's like you're painting with a different brush. It's like I'm approaching songwriting in a different way, even more so on the second album, because now, as I said, we know what we're doing more. It's a way for me to sort of step away from something that is extremely important in terms of the business side of Evergrey and Redemption and all that stuff. So for me, I mean, I'm not saying that I can't do that in Evergrey or Redemption too, but it's different, and it's also just the two of us. We don't have any more to rely on than the two of us, which is has only been a benefit, I feel. We're quite strong music nerds as it is when it comes to production and recording, and have all of our, we're on top of all of our gear. So we don't really need an outside ear to tell us if we're going in the right direction. And we don't even want that, this is something we want to produce ourselves. And then we have Jacob lending the final magic touch in the mix. I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it offers first and foremost, a writing and creative partner of the caliber and the ability to mesh with me that I have never had in my musical life. Because, I've worked with a lot of people, and I love my bandmates in other projects. They're great guys, great musicians, I wouldn't change them for the world. But there's something special when Tom and I write together, and it goes beyond me being a decent piano player and him being one of the world's best singers. It goes beyond that. We see things really similarly artistically. We have a very similar idea of like how we want things to sound. We like many of the same things, and we disagree on just enough to make it interesting. So it's a kind of creative synergy that I've never had before.
And it's also, I've never found anyone that is as quick as me in my head, or sort of, because I super ADHD when it comes to writing music. So you should hear how it sounds in the studio when me and him sit together. It's like, it's just vowels, there's nobody's explaining anything, and then it ends up being a goddamn song. So it's like, yeah, which is great, because that is something that I think also is tough for other people working with me, trying to figure me out and at the speed that I'm going. Not saying that is superior or anything else, but my mind works very similarly to what Vikram's mind how Vikram's head does. So I think.
Yeah.
Haven't been able to listen to both records. When I listened to Nectar, it was immediately obvious to me that it felt more complete. It felt, I hate using the word mature, but it felt more together. The fluidity that the album had was more noticeable. So the impact that it had on my enjoyment of the playability of going from the first to the last song was increased. How do you guys connect an album like this that has such strength in the individual songs and such uniqueness within the individual tracks, but then you still are able to bring them all together and make them all part of a much larger picture?
I guess the sequencing is something that we spend a lot of time working on, actually, because as soon as we have versions of the songs, I mean, at least I do this. I think Tom, you do the same. They go into iTunes and you start sequencing them, and you kind of get a vibe for how things flow. And I tend to like kind of music nerd reasons why things flow. I like maybe when there's a note at the end of a song, and maybe it's like the dominant chord to the start of the next song and things like that. And Tom doesn't think of things quite that way, but I think intuitively he does, because the song order that we settle on together, it does have these kind of musical transitions. And then because in terms of the actual songs themselves, we know ourselves better, so I think the songs are more cohesive because of that. Like, they're starting from a really strong foundation, all of them, and I think that just lends itself well to a nice smooth playthrough. It's awesome that you feel that way, by the way, really.
Yeah, for me it's like just I mean it's quite easy. Yeah, sometimes you have a few songs that have the exact same vibe in terms of tempo, key, and atmosphere. Then you have a hard time sort of
Yeah.
placing them. But yeah, for this album, I think we just did one, and then that was that.
And what's also nice is that I write everything on piano. So when you write everything on guitar in a certain tuning and you want it to sound heavy, I think a lot of things tend to be in similar keys. You tend to use a small handful of keys for the majority of your writing. But when I write on piano, I make a conscious effort to try and write most songs in different keys. So I think that lends itself to a fresh experience when you listen, because you're not listening to 4 songs in D in a row, or 5 songs in drop C, or whatever the case may be. There's always some kind of ebb and flow to the keys, which makes you feel like you're going on more of a journey, because you're going on a tonal journey as well.
You guys brought Raphael Brown from Lepers on this record. What do you feel like he brings to the table that makes this album jump out a little bit more?
I mean,
An element of quality, I'd say, and
Yeah.
an element of another. I mean, it's adding some grit to it too. It's adding a different sound, of course, and yeah, and it's just lovely to have a talented musician sort of also dive into our stuff and feeling it the way we do, because it's evident for us that he does. He connects with the music in the same way or similar way that we do. So it's
Yeah.
it's just awesome.
And he's a great creative mind too. I mean, one difference between Satellites and this album is that on Satellites, he played 99% of what I wrote on paper, and he just executed that. On this album, it was maybe 75% of what I wrote, and then we had him do passes throughout the songs where he could be more creative. And there was a lot of like effects, gritty things, distorted swirls that go in one ear and out the other that are actually cello. And like Tom said, it adds this grit and this immediacy and this human quality. I mean, even if the average listener can't tell why a live string performance sounds different than a MIDI software one, I think they can tell there is a difference. There's a certain quality that the live player just has, and you just hear emotions on the bow, and sometimes you hear breaths or squeaks or things like that. And
It's called the human aspect.
It's so important. It's
Yeah.
so important.
But I mean, there was also many times strings and violins are very often nice sounding, and I actually called up Vic and said we need to have Raph play something that is dirtier. We need to make something that doesn't feel great all the time. So that maybe that was a challenge for him, because there's this Swedish cello player who is incredibly talented, who used to play bass with Yngwie Malmsteen actually. So so I sent him and of course he knew who that was. So I mean, so tried to do something like this for some parts. So we added a lot of, as you said, more grit. Yeah, it's cool.
When I looked at the piano, the keyboards, all of the orchestration behind the sound, there was this immersing aspect to it. It made me feel very intimate. It's almost like you guys created this jazz bar feel to the overall sound, where you get immersed in it, but you don't necessarily notice that you're getting yourself immersed in it. Was that the intimate experience that you wanted this album to kind of give the listener?
I think it automatically became like that when Vic went home to his childhood home and recorded it on his childhood grand piano, where he wrote everything and learned everything. So, and then the intimacy comes from us working extremely close to, on this album, way closer as compared to the last album. But yeah, Vic, what do you say?
The intimacy translates from the creative experience to the listening experience. So when you spend so much time immersed in details and making the details project in the right way so that they don't just get lost, but the things that are important come through, you end up creating this multifaceted, textured experience for the listener, where these little bits of ear candy swirl in and out as you listen, but you still have this core of the piano and vocals that's very strong and centered. And so I think that gives you exactly the feeling that you're talking about when listening, where, you can sit and close your eyes and imagine that Tom's, 3 feet in front of you, and I'm like, a foot next to him, and we're sitting in your room playing. Mm-hmm. And then you also have the soundscape of all the synthesizers and the cellos and everything that kind of swirl around in your head. So it does manage to be kind of intimate and grand at the same time, which is, I guess, what makes Silent Skies what it is.
Yeah.
At what point in the creative process do the lyrical content come into play? Do you guys work on the lyrics specifically with the album in mind, or do you have some stuff that you kind of work on throughout the time, and then this would fit perfectly into this song?
Yeah, I mean, lyric wise, I work often just on my walks every day. I sort of get the words come to me. It sounds super weird, but they do. And it can be a sentence that sort of set off a vibe for a song, or creates a world within my head, that I see extremely clearly. And it's only important for me to get the vibe going, and then I sort of paint that world until I'm done. And then I sort of converse with the song, it's like a debate back and forth until there's nothing more to say, and then that's pretty much when the song is finished. And the same goes for the actual music making that we do too. There's so many things that we work on. We worked on one of the songs, well, I think it was Cold, right? Closer, yeah, right. So yeah, we worked on that for I think we have 15 versions of it, and we changed tiny bits. It was barely any difference from time to time, but it still wasn't there, so that's like the song is speaking to you, telling you it's not good enough. Extremely frustrating, but extremely rewarding when it's done too. So
was that the most challenging track on the album for you guys?
Oh yeah,
yes, sure. By far.
And
we don't know what it is. Still don't know what it is or what it was. Maybe it was a sucky song.
Going back to the lyrical vibe thing, I remember the first sentence I heard of the entire album was the snow on my window pane from Fallen from Art, the very first sentence of the album. The great thing for me is that when I hear some of these beautifully evocative phrases that Tom comes up with, it completely, it kind of tells me where we are musically and sonically for the album as well, because when I hear a single sentence like that, I hear what the synths are supposed to do, and I hear what the role of the cello is going to be, and I hear the chord progressions in the bridge that are going to follow. I hear all that because, this sentence kind of speaks to me and it tells me that. So the lyrics are really important throughout the writing process, and it informs what we do musically hugely. And also, at least for me, by the time that Tom presents vocal snippets to me, I mean, we're working with vocal ideas and lyrics really early in the process, compared to, I think, how a lot of bands do the music, and then they slap the vocals on top. And that's a really normal process for a lot of artists. But I mean, we have very strong vocal ideas down sometimes before the entire musical arrangement is finished. And that's important because it's such a big ingredient to what's going on. I feel like you can't just slap that on at the end, because with music that's so sparse in its own way, I mean, the vocals occupy such a big part of the arrangement that, I mean, you have to keep them in mind at all times, and you have to serve the vocals in all the ways that the vocals need to be served. So I think that's actually a big difference between the way we work for Silent Skies and the way that I personally have worked in a lot of other projects, where finished musical demos almost always come first.
Yeah, I'm not the same, but I'm not working exactly like this in every way either, but close. It pretty much starts in the same way, but then it's, you know, it's so much more elements, I would say, to the music of Evergrey that I have to take care of in my mind. So then it sort of takes a leap into something else, and you know, it's parallel worlds, I would say, that goes on at the same time. This is too, so it's totally incomprehensible. Whatever.
I have a couple more questions for you guys, and it's going to be specific to both of you because I want to put you guys on the spot a little bit. Vikram, I know you mentioned Tom's vocals before. If you had to explain to one of your best friends Tom's vocal prowess, how would you define it?
This might be weird, and it would depend on the friend I'm talking to and how I'm trying to hook them in. But when I first fell in love with Tom's voice, I was a really big Bruce Springsteen fan. And I always thought that Tom was like the heavy metal Bruce Springsteen. And what I mean by that is that Bruce Springsteen is a storyteller almost before he is a musician. And the way he conveys his lyrics are so strong and so emotional and so gritty, but not like ugly gritty. They're like, you know, there's a lot of conviction. There's conviction in every word Bruce has ever sung in his entire career. And I felt the same way with Tom, that there's this directness and this emotional quality to his voice that is paired with amazing technique. And he can do runs for days, and his pitch is great, and his vibrato is great. All these kind of technical things that people care about. But it's all about the conviction for me, and it always has been. And that's why it's so amazing to work with him, because that conviction in his vocals is brought into the music that we create together. And for me, as a fan of his, that's a beautiful thing.
Thank you. I mean, for me, it's pretty much the same. I'm telling a story, and if somebody listens, that's just great. But you know, that's my mission. But the mission, I mean, I'm on a mission for myself, not for anybody else. So it's like, and I think the same thing goes with Bruce. He's talking about his life, you know. I mean, so yeah.
And for you, Tom, my question for you is the last question. How rewarding it is for you to work with somebody as talented and as diverse as Vikram is?
Extremely. I mean, I would say also the first thing that I think of when working with Vikram is the sort of honor it is for me to step into a young musician's life. I mean, he's not young as a musician, but he's a young guy, you know, and sort of re-experiencing some of the things that I did when I was a young aspiring artist myself, you know. So it's it's extremely rewarding. It's a privilege, and it's also it's just lovely.
Thank you.
Well, on that note, guys, thank you very much for taking the time today. Nectar out February 4th on Napalm Records. Everybody should go check it out. Incredible sounding album. The vocals are phenomenal. You guys really surpassed what you had done before with this record. Very intimate experience.
Thank you very much, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. Take care.
Take care, man.
Bye.